Okay, so on behalf of Hope Living and the Hope Beauty Network, we are thrilled to have you on here with us today. Dr. Bruce Twerkian is a facial plastic and reconstructive surgeon, dual board certified by the American Board of Facial Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery. He is a member of the American Academy of Facial Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery and focuses his practice exclusively on the face and the nose. Welcome, Dr. Twerkian.
Thank you, April. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So let's start with how's quarantine been for you?
Quarantine, I have to say, it's been relatively pleasant. LA is a nice place to hang out, and it's kind of a fun place to get out for 10, 15 minutes at a time. Working from home has been a bit of a challenge because, you know, when you're at home, there's distractions. There's some homeschooling activities going on. There's helping children log on to Zoom and getting their home curricular activities done and things like that. And so it's challenging. It kind of breeds a little bit of a mania. I started to sense that I had like a little bit more ADD than my usual, you know, jumpiness in thought, thinking like, okay, I got to do this, then I got to do that, then I got to do this, then I got to do that. But it all sort of has started to come together. I've had a few office visits for a few emergencies, lacerations, and that kind of stuff. And then I've had also, I'll be on call at Cedars-Sinai this weekend, so hopefully that'll be quiet. But I've had also a number of consultations on the computer, which have gone remarkably well. You know, I prepared initially for being able to do these types of consultations and also to be able to work on some of my other activities at work that are very difficult to get to during patient care, such as tuning up the marketing, making sure we have the good pictures that we want up, and making sure we have the websites tuned up and the product pictures up on the websites and that kind of stuff. And so I had a big 4 terabyte drive with all my photographs from the office, the before and afters and whatnot. And I brought that here. And so that's become really useful in doing the consultations as well. Because if I need to show before and afters, I just pop up before and afters. Patients send me their before pictures, and I do a screen share with them on Zoom. And then we have a really quick Photoshop session as well on my laptop. Super easy. I can even do it right here in the backyard. So it's kind of a nice thing. That might be good actually going forward. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But other than that, quarantine, you know, I've been painting a little bit more. I love to paint. And I've been baking bread a little bit more. I love to do that. I'm tweaking the sourdough. And if you're a fan of my Instagram site and watching it or following it, there will be a video that I made myself and edited myself. So please excuse me if there's any sound in the background. I'm trying to work on cutting that sound out and maybe putting some good music to it. But it's a start to finish using a sourdough starter. I don't go into how to make the sourdough, but anybody who wants to after seeing the video can just private message me and I'll send you some instructions on sourdough starter. It's yummy stuff.
I wasn't expecting sourdough making tips on this. This is fantastic.
Yeah, it's like the new thing. I've always loved sourdough as a kid. And when I started to make it, I finally, figured it out. I realized that there's a lot of people dabbling in artisan sourdough now. There's a lot of people playing around with it and giving instructions on the internet and web and stuff. So if you keep your eyes open, you'll see a lot of it.
We're going to go ahead and begin with our questions.
Absolutely.
Will hygiene protocols change or update at your practice coming out of this pandemic? What changes do you foresee making permanently?
There will absolutely be hygiene protocol changes in the practice. There already had been prior to the quarantine lockdown that we experienced in March, because we kind of saw that this was coming and we were a little bit concerned with people who were traveling and coming to see us from out of the country or out of state. And so we implemented strict hand washing regulations and rules. We implemented a very strict wipe down in between patients Whereas there used to be a wipe down between patients in every case, in every room, exam room. Now the wipe downs are happening even on the door handles. They're happening even on the light switches. They're happening on pretty much any surface that can be either touched by the patient or could have exposure to respiratory droplets. We will also be implementing a mask protocol. I've seen a few patients in the office as emergencies have arisen, and I've insisted everybody wears a mask. And it was easy because the CDC had already sort of said everyone should wear a mask when they're outside and in public spaces. So it didn't meet any resistance or anything. But I think that going forward, whereas in our aesthetic practices, and we weren't used to this at all because we deal with healthy patients all the time. Aesthetic practice, you kind of presume and assume everybody's healthy. We never really had anybody wear masks as providers or as caretakers or even ancillary personnel in our office. But now everyone's going to be wearing masks. So anytime you meet with a consultation or consultant regarding scheduling surgery, or if you want just pricing, or if my medical assistant is with me or with one of my nurse injectors in the exam room helping with injections, we should all be wearing masks so that any kind of aerosols or spray, so to speak, when we're talking or discussing things doesn't really transmit anything that we may be carrying. So these things are going to sort of change the face of, I think, medicine overall. But now the aesthetic practice is starting to look a little bit more like those higher risk, like oncology or maybe even infectious disease practices. We're going to be implementing that type of protocol in our offices now.
Moving over to breast augmentation and breast implants. If you had breast augmentation with fairly large implants, what's the process or procedure in reducing their size, and how long would you wait to do so?
So I don't do breast augmentation or breast implants, but I see a lot of patients who get it. We have plastic surgeons we work with, and we are always in the process of referring, cross-referring, and doing cases in combination. My awareness of it is that when the implants are removed, if you're just removing, there's nothing that needs to be done. Sometimes a capsule around the implant needs to be removed. But if you're downsizing in order to maintain the position of the newer implant in the proper position, occasionally a sling needs to be performed. And sometimes there's tissue or fascia in the area that can be used in order to make the sling and maintain the position of the implant in a higher position so it doesn't drop too low. But occasionally there needs to be synthetic material added, or even xenograft material, which is like fascia that comes from an animal such as a pig or that kind of thing that can be added in order to hold up an implant. So it's a bigger operation for sure.
You've touched on this a little bit. What are your predictions for the long-term impact in the industry based on this pandemic?
It's a very interesting question. I think in the long term, let's break it up into two different versions of long term. Within the next year, and I would call that long term now, that's going to be the most difficult time. And the reason is we have a lot of difficulty really identifying people that could be affected with the novel coronavirus or COVID-19. And the reason is that it can present in so many different ways, and there can be isolated symptoms. They don't really come as a complex or list of symptoms that's the same every time. And so it's really difficult. So the universal precautions that we're going to take, such as masks and hand sanitizing or hand washing, and overall precautions that we'll take to maintain clean surfaces, pens, iPads, computers, anything that can be in contact with staff or patients. In addition to that, I think that we're going to see a little bit more of a tendency to try to keep people out of the office overall. There's going to be consultations and follow-ups that sometimes I would do in the office just because I love to have my patients come, put my arm around them and say, "You look great. Let me take some pictures. Give me a hug. Let's take a selfie." But some of those visits may be cut down to just a virtual visit on Skype or on Zoom, whichever way we can get encryption. and be able to sort of, just look on the screen and see that things are okay, and then just have them come in at specified time intervals to get the long-term follow-ups on those aesthetic patients. So that's something I see coming right now. We're gonna kind of grapple with that. And the FDA and the FDA, I think, is who regulates this, and the medical board have softened up the regulations for the time being on how we conduct virtual consultations and virtual visits. So doing them by Zoom, and there's been a little bit of bad press with Zoom about their encryption and their lack of security and so on. But these things, for now, as far as HIPAA is concerned, have been a little bit more dysregulated, a little softer in terms of regulation. And I think that that's going to change soon, where, when we all get back into practice, there's going to be some requirements on what type of programming or what type of platform we can use for these video consults and the video follow-ups. So that's another thing that will be changing. We'll be getting used to doing that kind of thing more than the in-office visits. In the long term, and there'll be a big screening process for now on who we let in the office, including like drug reps. It used to be that I could count on one of our drug reps, who I love very much, who's our Galderma drug rep. His name is Chad, to, every Friday bring me a cup of coffee and come chat with me for about 15-20 minutes. And I think some of those visits may be cut down to a minimum, just to avoid exposure, decrease in exposures, and so on. And I'm going to miss my Starbucks coffee, Chad, if you're listening. And if you look at those things as, parts of a practice that really make it enjoyable and really make the practice what it is, it's going to be a little challenging in that regard, because we get a lot of satisfaction and a lot of meaning out of this when we're clinicians. But our primary concern is really the safety of our patients and our staff and our families. So that's the way it's going to go. In the long term, what's going to happen is probably we will have some form of control over this madness. There's already, I have a background in microbiology and molecular genetics at UCLA before I went to medical school, so I'm kind of a virus geek, and so I've been sort of following this thing and its path and its epidemiology for a while, and was really up on it when I was learning about SARS about, I think it was like 20 years ago that we had SARS, and then after that the MERS, the Middle East, which are both coronaviruses as well. And, we still haven't had a vaccine, but this is the one thing that's going to really make it possible for a vaccination against such coronaviruses to be made. And we will eventually have some form of control, whether it's going to be cyclic, like the influenza virus, where it changes every year and we have to repeat it every year and show documentation to our hospital and to our surgery centers and medical clinics and so on to be able to provide care at those places. We don't know yet. It might just be a one-time thing, but we don't know that yet. That's yet to be determined. But I think that with the technologies that some of these biotech companies have in hand, it's very easy for them to go either way. If they had to adjust every year and make predictions on what the next coronavirus will be next year, it's possible that it can be done. So we'll have control in about a year or so, most likely.
We're going to move over to some things from social influencers. Can you speak on the threads that I've seen so much of from social media, young influencers, for lifting the eyebrow area? Is it
yes,
safe?
Of course.
Complications?
Yes, of course. We can talk about the threads. So the threads, I just had a conversation this morning with a friend of mine, Vanessa Flores, who runs Aesthetic Everything. And I think she's a wonderful person. We had a really nice conversation. She reminded me that she was one of the original reps in the company that made the contour threads. So those things, they came out about 2005 or so, or 2000, I think it was a little earlier, but in 2005, 2006, they started to be really widely used. They were FDA approved here. They were a non-absorbable thread that, just like the Neo threads and the PDO threads that we see today, have like a barbed suture technology. They got pulled off the market after they were replaced with a with an absorbable version of the same thing. And then for some reason, the absorbable version got pulled off the market, roughly 2007 or 8, I think. Don't quote me on that exact date. Later on came the PDO threads. They were a lot easier, and these are the Nova threads or the PDO threads that we see now, or the Euro threads. They go by many different names, and I believe a lot of them are made in similar places or same type of factories. But the concept changed a little bit because they became a lot easier to place. So instead of having to make an incision like we did with the older technique, we could just put in a little cannula, which is almost akin to like an injection needle like you would get for Botox or filler, and the thread would be deposited with the cannula. So it decreased some of the risks tremendously. The risk of bleeding, the risk of hematomas and infections, those things decreased quite a bit. But it also opened up to a whole new chapter in the application of these threads. Not that people weren't already trying to use them for the eye area or for the eyebrow area or for the mid-face area. People were already using them, and I had already kind of dabbled in that too before they were pulled off the market. But now with the advent of the newer deployment techniques, it's a little easier to do so. I think that they should be approached with caution in that area because the knowledge of anatomy and the layers of anatomy in that particular area is pretty complex. It would be a rare circumstance or a rare occurrence, but it can occur that the nerve coming out of the facial nerve complex or bundle right here around the ear that comes up into the forehead that allows you to move your forehead like this can be compromised in one of these procedures. Usually, or generally speaking, that compromise would be temporary, but there can be permanent damage there. There's also a number of veins and arteries that pass through this area, and they can pose a bit of a threat with regard to hematoma formation and severe consequences with regard to bleeding underneath the skin and that kind of thing. So if you're with a practitioner who, because of the ease of the PDO threads or the Nova threads, is dabbling or kind of venturing up into an area like this on something that's really made for an area like this in the lower face, then you may be at a little bit more risk for that type of complication to occur. The longevity of these treatments is also always of question. The barbed suture threads that are the most applicable in this area, there's another type of thread that I'll touch on in a minute, is usually not that long lasting. So if someone promises you a year, I would expect that in about 6-7 months, they're going to say, well, yeah, you'll get a year only if you repeat it. And that's kind of the way I've seen these threads work. I'm not opposed to them. I think that they can be a really nice short-term something to play with and get some effect and have a little fun with it. But I also don't think that they are something that is going to be like the holy grail on restructuring or rejuvenating this area. Also, the other thing to watch out for is that, you know, we see a lot of this look in social media with those threads that have been placed. And I would like to just urge people to sort of think about why it's being done. If it's something you're seeing on social media that looks good in that particular picture, it doesn't necessarily mean it's something that's made for every face. These materials, these techniques, these treatments were really designed for rejuvenation of a drooping face, not taking a 20-something-year-old's face and stretching the heck out of it. It just doesn't always make sense aesthetically. It's kind of a neat look that can also be accomplished with makeup for a more temporary and less risky effect. And I would urge that, you know, we kind of think about why we're doing it before we take dramatic steps like that.
What about stubborn fat? What would the options be for someone that's in relatively good shape and they have pockets of fat that they really just can't seem to eliminate? The upper arms.
Yeah, I love this topic. So fat is storage. It's stubborn because you still have stuff to put in the storage. So if you're keeping your storage full by having more calories than what you're actually burning, you're not going to burn that fat. But as you mentioned, stubborn means that there's certain pockets that just won't go away no matter what, right? Traditionally and technically speaking, liposuction is probably the treatment of choice for this. It's like the gold standard, but we now have so many different options, and they're so nice that they're definitely worth using and thinking about. One of the more common ones that we talk about always is Kybella, and we see this. One of the Kardashian sisters, I believe it was Chloe, who became a spokesperson for the Kybella brand that's owned by Allergan, is really made for this area, and it's basically a bile derivative that melts fat. That's how your body processes fat when you eat it, and you can now take advantage of this derivative from bile to inject it into fat areas that you just can't get rid of, and it helps to melt that fat down. It takes multiple treatments. There can be some swelling involved in it, and that's really the more I think limiting aspect of that particular treatment. And then the others, which we hear about a lot, people use the term cool sculpt a lot. And whereas cool sculpt is a particular type of treatment, there's a number of different technologies that can be applied to fat reduction. One of them is by cryolipolysis, which is basically what that means is cooling down the fat cells so much that they congeal, kind of like if you put your olive oil in the refrigerator, it would turn into kind of a solid-ish type of a consistency. And then as that fat is thawing again within the hour or so afterwards, then some of the cells say, oh, that wasn't a good feeling, and they program themselves to go away and die. And then your body processes it, you eliminate it, and it's gone. And so that's one technique. The other is that radio frequency and ultrasound, which in some of the skin tightening treatments that we've seen out there, can actually, through the skin without really significantly damaging skin or without any penetration into skin, can actually reduce fat as well. They also can tighten the skin around it so that you can sort of tighten up some of the tissue. And then my favorite of all, which we use in our office, is called SculpSure. SculpSure is, from a technical standpoint, it's a diode laser, basically the same type of laser that you might use for hair removal. But the way that it's applied to the body is different. It gets applied by these little plates that are about this big each. I'd say probably, two of them next to each other would be the size. Each one is about the size of your iPhone, for example, right? And so that comes with 4 of these on each machine. So you're limited kind of to an area of about this big, I would say, pretty much like the upper abdomen or the lower abdomen if you're treating it, or you could do arms, for example, with one treatment as well. And what it does is it applies the glass of this device onto your skin, which cools down. And it cools down to the extent that there's no injury on the skin and no risk of getting any kind of damage in the hair follicles. We do recommend that the hair is trimmed completely, but you can't really get damage to the hair follicles. And then as the diode laser penetrates through that cooled skin, it gets down and heats up the layer underneath. So technically, it's really cooking and heating up the fat and going through that same process of programmed cell death that makes the cells go away and the fat dissolves, and then your body sort of processes and eliminates it. And I think that's one of the best ones to me because we don't see any real problems with cavitation, meaning we don't get lumpy bumpies. We very rarely have anybody with significant amounts of pain afterwards, but usually there is some pain with all these procedures during the procedure. It takes about 25 minutes in the office. We recommend 2 to 3 treatments per area. It depends on what area it is in the body. And there's no downtime really because you can go out and just get in your bathing suit and run to the beach right afterwards. You don't really have to slow down for any reason. Yeah.
With the pandemic at hand, what long-term effects do you see for the plastic surgery industry as a whole?
That's a good question. I think my concerns are both with the viral aspect, with the real health aspect, as well as with the economic aspect. I think the economy has taken a big hit. We're hoping that with the CARES Act and with some of the stimulus plans and the PPP, if any of you are not aware of it, you should ask your bankers about it if you're small business owners. With any of those plans in place and with all of them in place, we should get a kind of a push in the economy, and hopefully people will still be able to afford the treatments that they were enjoying with us beforehand, but it's going to change a little. And I think that it's possible to some extent that economically people will be taking a hit. Even as people go back to work, it's going to be a little bit harder for them to be able to afford things for a little while until we build the economy back up again. Most likely people will not be taking vacations over the next upcoming year. So we may have a year where we enjoy at least a little bit less of a cyclic nature in our practices, in the aesthetic practices. We may have a year in which things are kind of steady and relatively busy, and then after that maybe a little bit of a drop off as the economic impact hits more and more people. That's sort of yet to be determined. And the other thing that I've thought about a lot, the quarantine time is a really introspective time. It's people are way more introspective. More of us are letting our hair grow out and not shaving. More women are not coloring their hair, letting some of their grays come out. People are getting into mindfulness and yoga and meditation and earthiness and really connecting with nature and with the earth. And I wonder if the sense of vanity that we had seen and experienced and watched basically boom and explode over the social media era will be curtailed a little bit. I wonder if that's going to be something that people will be sort of slowing down on a little bit. I, for one, I can tell you, there was a lot of online shopping happening here. And I can't really see why I would need to go online shopping so much anymore. I don't need suits right now. I don't need ties right now. There's no weddings that I'm going to be going to in the next upcoming year, most likely. If we're lucky, maybe this summer we'll see a few smaller gatherings. But the social and vanity type of experiences that we were having, we may not really have quite as much anymore. It's definitely a game changer.
With that being said, what procedures do you see being the most in demand when we come out of this?
Initially, I'm expecting, and I know that I'm going to have a big surge of patients coming in for their injectable filler and Botox treatments, because I get phone calls, texts, emails on a daily basis, multiple, saying my face is melting off, my Botox is wearing off, my lines are coming back, my headache's coming back. So I think that's going to be our first kind of storm, and that's going to keep us busy. The second, I think, is going to be more on the rejuvenative aspect. I think we're going to see probably a surge in any rejuvenative treatments, including facelifts, brow lifts, neck lifts, that kind of thing. And I think that's just a natural transition from the fillers and the Botox. I think the people are going to realize that what they really want, they're not getting with the fillers and the Botox, and that just kind of naturally transitions from that. We may have a little bit of a decrease in some of the other lipo, breast augmentation, potentially rhinoplasty, those kinds of things may decrease a little, but it's yet to be seen. There's definitely a big change that happened in the world, and we don't really know yet how humanity is going to respond to it with that regard, but definitely we'll be busy with fillers in the beginning, for sure.
What about your office? Are you guys open at all?
We are closed, and the staff is all working from home. So that we've been closed and the staff has been working from home. My wife, who runs a weight management practice, a medical weight management practice, has been seeing all of her patients from home on the computer. She has a HIPAA compliant platform now that she uses, as opposed to using Zoom. And so she's been able to maintain her practice mostly, with the exception of a few of the newer consultations that they kind of dropped off in the beginning, but now people are adding on, and it's been pretty good for her. The rest of the staff is mainly at home. We unfortunately had to downsize a little on the newer staff that we had hired, only because the we foresee that the demand for our services is probably going to decline when we return back. And so we don't necessarily expect that we're going to be as busy as we were before. We kind of have to sort of slow down the pace in the office anyways when we go back, because we don't want to have people congregating in waiting rooms all together at the same time. We don't want to have multiple people entering into the building and into the office all at the same time. And so we're going to have to set a little bit of a different parameter on how long the visits are and the time in between and so on. So we are at home basically working on that. And I've been available for any emergencies that come up. There's a couple of injection emergencies that came up, and a few lacerations emergencies that came up. A lot of my patients were reaching out and asking about symptoms that they have and whether they should go get tested for coronavirus. So for that regard, I've been available and open.
Do you have any recommendations, while someone can't get in, for a proper wrinkle cream?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we have our own line of skincare on my website. It's drtorkian.com, and there's a shop button on the left and also on the top, and it'll take you right to a Shopify website that we created for this. My recommendations are basically there's a few things you need to manage with wrinkles. One is you need to manage your skin hydration. The second is you need to manage your skin moisture, which is emollient. So the hydration is basically handled by hyaluronic acid, same stuff that we inject into the skin, but applying it from the outside gets into a totally different layer and area of the skin, and it can fill in a lot of the fine wrinkles with proper use and continued use. So a hyaluronic acid cream, one of ours on our website is called HA, 5 times collagen or 5 times collagen HA. And the name of the actual label on it is Essence Plus. That one is awesome for maintaining plumpness in the skin. And then a good moisturizer, such as the Rich moisturizer that we use, which is an emollient, which basically just sort of locks in some of that hydration that you put in with the HA. It's a little bit more of an oilier feel to it and a heavier feel to it. So not necessarily for everybody's taste. It's more of a night cream for most women. Most men don't like the heaviness on their face. And then the third that I think is super duper important is antioxidants. Antioxidant number 1 is vitamin C. Vitamin C antioxidant is probably one of the best ways you can condition the skin. Vitamin C is an essential vitamin in the creation of collagen. So sort of being able to build and restore collagen in your skin is you require the vitamin C. So you should take it internally and apply it on your skin. It's also a brightener of the skin. So it can help you with some of the fine dark spots or the smaller kind of faint dark spots in the skin as well. And I like an overall kind of broad spectrum antioxidant as well. And as you'll see on all of our skincare products that are on our websites, they all have the ingredients listed on the description, and a lot of them will have green tea polyphenols. That's one of the best ways to get good, broad spectrum antioxidants, and resveratrol. Those are the 2 things that I would look for in a good skincare antioxidant protocol. So hydration, moisturization, antioxidant. Those are the 3 things.
Perfect. Do you use Profound RF or have any thoughts on this type of non-invasive technology?
That's a great question and very timely, because I was thinking about that right before the quarantine hit. Profound RF is a technology that is similar to a number of different things that are out there. It's radio frequency that is applied through microneedling. So previous radio frequency was just through the skin. It radiated through the skin, and there was a little bit more risk of getting fat loss with it, as we were discussing in the previous portion of the webinar. With Profound RF and with Morpheus 8 and with Secret RF, which is, I think, it's a different one of the companies, I believe Candela, but I can't remember. They all apply basically the radio frequency through microneedles. And so because the needles are penetrating into the skin, they can pick and choose the depth at which the radio frequency is being submitted, and thereby decrease some of the side effects of fat loss that decrease in volume in the face that could sometimes look a little bit more aging. So I really like the technologies. I think they're really a very useful and helpful technology. People need to realize, though, that they do have a lot more downtime than what you would expect. There's a significant amount of swelling. It's not just from the needle penetration, but radio frequency itself is an energy that's being transmitted into the skin to kind of heat up certain layers to make them tighten up in their healing process again. And so that incites a quote unquote healing process like we were discussing, and it's swelling. There's swelling associated with it. And so I would say, you know, if you're looking for something that you want to do quick, it's not that. It does have downtime, and it does have some time that you would have to kind of wait for recovery and wait for healing and the treatment to really take effect. So if you've got a 6 month or so window where you can see the results, and about a maybe 2 week or 3 week window where you can wait for the swelling to go down, then it's a really good treatment for tightening up basically someone who doesn't really need surgery quite yet.
So I was going to ask you, you know, how would you compare that versus an actual facelift?
Yeah, they work on different levels, April. So with a facelift, you know, we're going under different layers. If you think about the skin of the face, it's like layers of an onion. So you peel off the skin layer, and then you peel off another layer, and then you peel off another layer, and you've got different things under there. So underneath the what we call SMAS, or the quote unquote muscle layer, that's where we do most of the work for lifting up sort of the heavier areas in the face. You know, the jowl area, the neck area, all the muscle in this area that starts to hang here and cause the turkey neck, turkey gobbler look, all that is connected to each other with the SMAS network, and it can all be lifted all with surgery. The laser or RF treatments, excuse me, not necessarily laser, that's more of a colloquial term for this, but the RF treatments that we were discussing, they don't really target that SMAS layer very well. They're designed to do so, but they don't really target it as well as surgery would. Whereas they are a little bit more on the superficial aspect of that. So if the SMAS layer or that muscle layer is here, those things are working a little bit higher than that. And so they happen to actually be really good together in people who are good candidates for this, where they have jowling and they have hanging tissue here, and they need a little bit more skin tightening. So it makes it a little bit easier to get like a good home run result when you're using both together in that respect. But in a person who's younger and doesn't quite need the elevation of the muscle layer or care for the platysmal bands or the turkey gobbler neck that happens down here, it could be a nice way to tighten up some looser skin that's more superficial.
Are you doing anything right now out in the market to assist other hospitals, other medical professionals? Anything with it?
Yes, so as a group, our surgery center, the Lasky Clinic Surgical Center in Beverly Hills, as a group, we have decided to donate our ventilators that we use in general anesthesia for use during the hospital surge that we were expecting to see. In the California area, that hospital surge looks like it was supposed to be coming this week or next week, and it looks like it may be a little bit more curtailed compared to what we were expecting to see. Thankfully, thanks for everybody staying home and following rules and protocols and being careful. Maybe it won't get as bad as it would, but that's our first step. Our second step is we have been receiving a lot of phone calls about masks and personal protective equipment. And what we've decided to do is consciously stay out of the fear buying or fear stockpiling. So we are not getting masks and gowns and that kind of stuff and stocking them up in our offices like some people did with toilet paper a few weeks ago. And so we're allowing it to be available for the community to have it, for the medical community to have it, those who need it on the front lines and the hospitals who need it the most. We also started an initiative with some of the doctors at Cedars in the ENT group, Dr. Sean Nasseri and one of our other colleagues, Vanessa Rothholtz, who are good friends of mine. They started an initiative to donate, to raise money donated by their patients in order to raise funds for additional protective equipment to be bought for Cedars-Sinai Hospital. So whereas we don't really foresee the need right now for stockpiling of it in the hospitals either, because it doesn't seem, at least within the LA or California area, that it's really rising that rapidly like it did in New York, for example. We probably are going to have to deal with this outbreak for about another year or longer within these hospitals still. And so that protective equipment is still going to be quite necessary. And another thing to keep in mind that people don't realize is that where this all started was in China. This is where a lot of our medical equipment comes from. A lot of our gowns that we use in surgery, the masks that we use for just regular isolation patients who are in the hospital and say are immunocompromised because they were on immunocompromising medications like cancer meds or something. We would have to wear masks to go in, but even those were on shortage before the outbreak came to the US. And that's all because of the damage to the supply chain because of where they come from. They had to shut down. So there wasn't anything coming out of China for a while. And so we already had sort of a shortage, and we're feeling the crunch with that regard. So to the extent that I've been serving as a consultant with some of my friends in the fabric industry and in the garment industry to switch gears and use some of their vendors and some of their factories that they were using for t-shirts and for dresses and jeans and so on, to switch and start to make medically acceptable or medically usable protective equipment such as masks or hats or even eye protection. And so that's led to some really interesting new products that have come into this market, and hopefully soon coming from Mexico rather than coming from China, so that we have a little bit of a difference, kind of a spread, so to speak, or a little bit of a variance in where they're coming from.
That would be great. What are your thoughts on Radius versus HA fillers?
My thoughts on Radius versus HA. I personally use both of them in my practice, and I love them both. Radius is the highest G prime of any filler. And if for those of you who are non-clinicians, G prime means basically the thickness and firmness of the material. And so for areas where chiseling is desirable, for example, along the jawline, along the chin, and sometimes along the cheek, depending on the look we're going for, or based on the gender, what kind of appearance change we're trying to make. It could be applicable to those areas. It has in it some hyaluronic acid. So it's calcium hydroxyapatite, which is basically the same calcium as in our bones and in our teeth, but it has some hyaluronic acid in it because that calcium as a powder wouldn't be able to go through the needle if it didn't have something to kind of help it go through, like a liquid type or a gel type thing. So that HA is roughly about, I would say, 20% of this material. I believe that's the number. I don't want to be quoted on any of this because I didn't prepare for it, but that I think it's about a 20%. And so that HA, particularly this type that comes in Radius, tends to decrease rather quickly. So in about a month, we see a little reduction in that chiseling effect or in the volumizing effect that we saw with Radius. And so that's one of the downsides that I think, not necessarily to me considered a downside. I think it's a good thing actually, because you get a chance to fine tune things. But sometimes patients who spend some money getting a couple of different syringes of it, for example, may come back after a month and say, "What happened to all my stuff?" And so that's one of the things that we see with it. But I love it. I think it's wonderful for getting chiseled look in this area, and especially along the jawline in men who are looking for a little bit more of a stronger jawline. The other thing that's really cool about Radius is that forever we have known that it has the ability to build collagen as it is going away. As your body processes that material and it's going away, you can build some collagen behind it. They were for a while promoting that as a long-term effect of Radius. But then for some reason, the FDA said you can't really promote it because the studies weren't really that clear. We know that it's happening though, and we see it because now with the hyperdilute Radius that people are using, and you'll see this on social media, some places too. I've been doing it for a while, but with hyperdilute Radius, meaning taking the Radius, mixing it with a ton of saline, injectable sterile saline, and then injecting it into certain areas that you're trying not just to plump up, but maybe you're trying to tighten it up a little bit. Maybe you're trying to change some of the opacity or the translucency of the skin a little bit. For example, this area or on the hands. In those areas, you can actually get a really nice buildup of collagen, sort of like we see with Sculptra. Now, that's not part of this question, but we can get into that. Now, the hyaluronic acid fillers, which are probably the easiest to use, probably the lowest in terms of risk profile, and most likely, I would say the go-to in most practices are, because they're like the workhorse of our injectable armamentarium. They can be injected pretty much anywhere in the face. We can use them in the tear trough area. It's off-label for now, but we can use them in the lip area, which we have FDA approval for, nasolabial fold, cheek, pretty much anywhere. You can get a really nice chiseled effect out of a thicker hyaluronic acid filler as well, such as Voluma or Restylane Lift. But they're not quite as high in G prime, meaning their thickness and firmness is not quite as good as Restylane. So depending on the patient and what type of skin they have and how heavy their tissues are and what the desired result is, we may choose one versus the other. Now, in someone who has no idea what they're looking for and they're just looking for plumping and whatnot, my go-to is usually a hyaluronic acid filler, because I know if I ever needed to, I could reverse it really quickly. And so I don't have to deal with someone who's got a result that they're unhappy with or something that I'm unhappy with and just doesn't look right on them. We can actually dissolve it and take care of it. So I think that's one of the advantages with the hyaluronic acids.
What are your thoughts on fat transfers? Sustainability?
That's a great question. I love fat transfers. I've been using fat transfer since 2006, which is probably the second wave or second coming of the fat transfer. It had a first wave way long before me, and I have to credit some of our predecessors with that work that they had done before, like Dr. Coleman and so many others. But fat grafts, I think, and we're learning more and more about them, I think are probably one of the best ways to restore volume in the face. They are more costly and they're more time consuming. They're kind of a project, I would say. I always tell my patients to be prepared for multiple treatments and a kind of a project going forward if you're choosing to do a fat graft. But they are my preferred way for most people. So with fat, you have to imagine when you're taking it out from one body part, you're sucking it out with a liposuction technique. Depending on how much negative pressure there is on it and that process and how much trauma the fat cells feel, there will be some of those fat cells that just don't survive. So on one treatment, when you've injected, say, that much fat, you can expect maybe this much of it to stay. April, are my hands okay in the screen here?
Yeah.
So say we inject about 100 cc's of fat in a face, maybe we can expect about 70 cc's or so to stay. It can be variable though. Given the circumstances of the day, the way that the technique went, the way that the patient's nutrition was beforehand, a lot of these things can have an effect on it, including their age and health status overall. And so, say that again.
A lot of variables. I mean, is it like that if you went and got an injection, like an HA injection or is it?
No. And that's why the HA injections and the Radiesse injections are not as much of a quote unquote project. But with the fat, because it's got that variability, we have to be sort of prepared for making it into a project. So what I do with the fat, and this has been shown in numerous different studies, fat is viable after freezing. So what I do with our fat is we usually extract extra and we treat the face as if we would treat it with any other filler or with any other fat graft material. And then we put some of it in the freezer and we wait. And then as time goes on and the fat declares itself and shows us how much of it is actually going to stay long-term, then we take the fat out, thaw it, re-inject, and we do that a couple of times over. In the pricing, the way that we do it, we actually include the touch-up treatments and the freezing and the storage with the fat graft treatment. So it's all kind of a package. And what I think is so great about that is that each time that you're doing this treatment, you're recruiting a certain amount of blood flow, and you're putting in a certain amount of what we call adipose-derived stem cells. And the combination of that has so many great and positive effects on the tissue around the fat graft, including the skin over it, that it gives you a number of different effects that are positive as opposed to just volumization, right? And so now with respect to the stem cells, more recently, and this again has come in a couple of different separate waves, but more recently, an emulsification of the fat has been performed, meaning you can take the fat and sort of blend it up. And it's been done with little tiny connectors that go between syringes. We pass the fat through the little connectors, and the size of the connectors are graduated. They're bigger, and then we make them smaller consecutively. And then the smallest one turns the fat into what we call nanofat. Now, technically speaking, there's no viable quote unquote fat in this anymore. But because all the fat cells have been sheared and broken up, what's left behind is just their debris and a little bit of oil. And then the following, that would be the stem cells that are in the fat. They're called the adipose-derived stem cells. A number of people are using these for various different things in the face and in the scalp. Some people are using them for injection into the scalp along with PRP in order to increase follicle strength and restore follicles in the scalp so we can see hair growth. I've been using it there and also in the under eye area and in the perioral skin for fine lines and wrinkles. In the under eye area, we've actually seen improvement of some of the dark circles that we had been, at a loss for trying to correct with any other treatment, including lasers. But with the fat injections or with the nanofat injections, we've seen an improvement of even the dark circles. And I contribute that basically to the fact that the adipose-derived stem cells increase the collagenization underneath the skin. They are collagen-forming cells. And so it's been a really wonderful thing to see all the improvements that people get from the adipose-derived stem cells.
Final question. Do you have a preferred thread provider? Any preference?
Yes. I promised we would touch on this before, and we didn't. I am a trainer and an avid user of the InstaLift by Silhouette. And the reason that I like it is I think that the anchoring technology or the way that the thread actually holds the skin is superior to the barbed threads. Its placement is a little different. It's a little bit more technical, so it requires a little bit more skill. Most people performing the InstaLift procedure are either dermatologists or plastic surgeons who have some knowledge at least about the layers of the skin and the layers deep to the skin and feel comfortable with longer needles and injectables and that kind of stuff. And so the technology is a little bit more complicated to use, but it gives a far superior outcome.
Final thoughts. Looking ahead, looking to 2020.
Oh, man. Well, right now, I'm just thinking about getting back into the office. And as you can see how passionate I get about these topics, I'm really excited to get back and actually start to use some of this knowledge and get back into treating patients and doing what I do for them. But as we get back into real life and as our I had some notes over here. I'm going to look and see. As our lives kind of start to go back to normal, I think one thing I just want to urge people is to not lose the connections that they've made really with family members, whether it's in person at home during quarantine or on Zoom or whatnot. But we've had a little extra time on our hands, and that luxury of the extra time has actually been kind of nice for us to reform some relationships. A friend of mine and I we're on Zoom this morning, or on FaceTime, I should say, this morning, and I was teaching him how I make the sourdough bread and showing him, what the process is, and we're going to be mixing it together tonight and sticking it in the oven together tomorrow. And it's something we would have never taken the time to do. And so I think what we should do as a human, as humanity, is try to kind of maintain some of that groundedness that we've gotten here. We'll get back into hustle and bustle again, and undoubtedly we'll be back in traffic again, which I don't miss at all. But we'll be driving half hour to go 4 miles to work again in Miami and in LA, right, April? And so it's one of those things that will undoubtedly happen, but let's try to maintain some of our humanity and some of that groundedness that we've achieved during this quarantine.
For our viewers, how can they contact you? What's the best way to reach you? They have more questions.
Probably the best way to get me is on my Instagram at drtorkian.com. At Dr. Torkian. That's at DRTORKIAN on Instagram. And they can PM me on that, or they can also email to my staff at hello@drtorkian.com. And it's HELLO at DRTORKIAN.com. And both of those are good ways to get a hold of us or me. Sometimes my staff will screen it before me, but I can usually get back to people too.
Fantastic. It's been a really great hour with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, April. I appreciate it. I love how this went. This was a great directions.
Oh, thank you. So on behalf of Hope Living and Hope Beauty Network, thank you. Stay healthy, stay safe, and thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, April. Bye-bye.